This is a narration based on a real life story. All names have been removed for security reasons and out of deep respect for the personal privacy and safety of the individual involved. Some details have been adjusted to protect identity. A 14-year-old girl from a devoted Muslim family in Columbus, Ohio found Jesus in a borrowed Bible at a kitchen table, and what happened next tore her family apart before it brought them together in the most miraculous way anyone could imagine. If you think God cannot reach into a Muslim home and change everything, stay, because this story will undo everything you assumed. This is not a story about religion defeating religion. This is a story about a God who runs toward people, and it will move you in ways you are not prepared for. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are reading or watching from, your city, your country, so we can pray for each other and stand together as one family across the world. I am 15 years old as I write this, sitting in our living room in Columbus, Ohio. My parents are in the kitchen. I can hear my mother humming. I can smell food on the stove. And none of this, not one ordinary, beautiful detail of this evening, was guaranteed 2 years ago when everything in our home broke apart because of what I believed. I want to tell you my story from the beginning, because the beginning matters. I was born into a Muslim home. My father came from Jordan with 2 suitcases and a strong faith. My mother grew up here in Columbus but never lost who she was. We had Arabic calligraphy near our front door. My father prayed 5 times every day without missing. During Ramadan, our house smelled like cooking from the afternoon onward, and when we broke the fast together at sunset, something in those evenings felt sacred. I love my family. I love the warmth of our home. I was not suffering. I was not lost. I was simply a curious girl with questions she had not yet found words for. The questions began with a classmate. She sat 2 seats from me in 3rd grade and had a quality about her I could not name at first. She was not the loudest or the most popular girl in class, but she was settled in herself in a way most children are not. She talked about Sunday mornings at her house with a joy on her face that looked different from how I felt about anything in my week. She talked about her grandmother, about sitting around the table, about her father praying before meals. And the way she described it, it sounded less like a duty and more like a gift. She was the first person who ever talked to me about Jesus in a personal way. Not like a textbook, like someone she actually knew. And it caught me every time, the naturalness of it. Jesus was simply in her life the way a real person is present in life, connected to how she felt, connected to what happened to her. The first time I went to her house, I noticed a wooden cross on the main wall of the living room. It was not small. It was clearly the most important thing in that space. And I understood immediately, because I had grown up with sacred words near my own front door, that this family was serious. This was not decoration. This was a declaration. Her grandmother was in that house, a woman who knew the Bible the way she knew her own name. One Easter afternoon, she sat us all down in the living room and told the story of the crucifixion, not like a lesson, like someone telling you about someone she loved. She described the garden, where Jesus prayed so intensely that sweat fell from him like drops of blood. She described the betrayal, the trial, the walk carrying the cross through a crowd that had eaten food from his hands just days before. She described the nails. I sat completely still. She described what he said from the cross, that he forgave the very people who were killing him while he was still hanging there. She described him making sure his mother would be cared for while he was dying. I could not move when she finished. Something had broken open in my chest, not violently, just suddenly, the way a window opens and air rushes in. The image of forgiving from the cross would not leave me for days. A love that went further than love was supposed to go. I had never encountered anything like it. I started reading the Bible quietly at my classmate's house after school. Her mother showed me where to begin, the Gospel of John. I read it slowly. Every few verses I had to stop because the words were doing something to me I needed to let happen before I continued. Jesus in those pages was not distant. He walked straight toward the people everyone else avoided. He touched people the religious rules said not to touch. He noticed the specific shape of each person's loneliness and spoke to it directly, without judgment. Then I read the resurrection. I cannot fully explain what happened when I read it. I can only tell you that something opened in me. A door I had not known was closed. A felt certainty arrived, the kind that lives in the body and not just in the mind. I sat at that kitchen table and knew, with my whole self, that Jesus was not dead, that this was real, that this had actually happened. I was 10 years old and I had found Jesus. Or perhaps more accurately, he had found me. For the next year, I lived two lives: the devoted daughter at home and the quiet believer inside. I kept attending mosque gatherings with my family. I kept the Ramadan rituals. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but inside, everything had. And carrying that gap was becoming unbearable. I told my mother on a Saturday morning in spring 2022, when my father was out and my younger brother was at a friend's house. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around the room, warm and ordinary and entirely mine, and I told her everything. I told her about the reading, about what had happened inside me, about believing that Jesus was who he claimed to be. She did not shout. She went very still. She turned to the sink with her back to me and stood there for several minutes. When she turned around, her eyes were wet. She told me she needed time. She said she was not going to pretend this was easy. And then she said she loved me. No matter what, she loved me. I broke open at those words. A whole year of carrying something alone, released all at once. She came and put her hand on my head the way she had when I was very small, and she stood beside me while I cried. My father was harder. He found out that same evening because my mother told him. She had to. Later that night he came to my room, sat on the edge of my desk chair, and looked at me. He did not shout. He became very still and very precise, the way he always did when something mattered deeply. He asked me how this had happened. He asked if I understood the weight of what I was saying. I told him everything, honestly, completely. I told him it had not been pressure from anyone. Something had found me, and I believed it with everything in me. He listened. When I finished, he sat quietly for a long moment. Then he told me he had raised me to be honest, and he could see that I was being honest. But he said his faith was not a costume. It was a ground his life was built on, and what I had told him felt like the ground moving. He left my room and the house changed. He was still present, still provided for us, still asked about school, but the warmth in him had pulled back somewhere I could not reach. It was not cruelty. It was grief. And watching my father grieve because of something I had done was the hardest thing I had ever experienced. Extended family made it worse. When word reached Jordan, my father's brother called repeatedly. Those conversations left my father exhausted in his spirit in ways that physical tiredness never had. My mother's friends from the mosque community pulled away. Not dramatically, not with confrontation, just a slow withdrawal of people who no longer knew how to be around us. Women who had been to our home for years. Women my mother had cooked for and laughed with and trusted. Gone, one by one, without a single argument. Just absence, which was somehow more painful than any confrontation could have been. My mother lost her community. My father carried the strain of fractured family bonds across an ocean. Our home, which had always been full of noise and movement and visitors, became quieter, and I carried the weight of knowing that my truth had cost them all of this. I kept praying through those months. Not formal prayers, just honest conversation with Jesus every day, sometimes several times a day. I told him my parents were good people. I told him they genuinely loved God. I asked him to show himself to them the way he had shown himself to me. My mother broke open first. She had started reading on her own, not because I asked her to, but because she needed to understand. She picked up a Bible and read the Gospels, looking, she later told me, for the place where she could bring me a clear objection. What she found instead was Jesus himself, and he did not cooperate with her plan. One night she read the story of the prodigal son. She read about the younger son who wastes everything and returns home in shame, planning to beg for a servant's position. And she read about what the father did when he saw his child still a long way off. He ran. He did not set conditions. He did not maintain his dignity and weight. He ran towards someone who had done nothing to deserve that response. She later told me she had to put the book down. She sat alone in the kitchen in the quiet house, and something broke open in her. She prayed that night, not in the familiar way, not with the Arabic words she had always used, but reaching toward Jesus. She told him that if he was real, she needed him to show her. She went to bed different from how she had woken up. My father's journey was slower. He read privately, without telling anyone. He told me later that he read the way an engineer reads, looking for structural failure, looking for where things collapsed under examination. He spent weeks looking for the place where it fell apart. He never found it. What he found instead was Jesus. A teacher whose every word pointed away from himself and toward the people around him. A man with no self-preservation instinct in any of the stories. A man who had no destination except the cross and no agenda except love. My father, who had always understood God through discipline and distance, found a God who ran toward returning sons before they had finished their apology. Something broke open in him that he had not expected. One evening, several months after that first hard night in my room, he came to the kitchen table where I was doing homework, sat across from me, and asked me to tell him about my faith. Not to test it, not to find flaws. He asked the way a person asks when they are genuinely, humbly seeking something they have not yet found. I told him everything from the beginning. When I finished, he was quiet. Then he said he wanted to come to church. I will never forget those words as long as I live. The Sunday we all walked into my classmates' family's church together was one of those days, while it is happening, will never leave you. Her mother met us outside and welcomed us with a grace that made my parents feel received rather than observed. The music reached us before we were even through the doors, full and alive in a way that you felt in your chest, not just heard with your ears. The pastor preached about a love that is not earned and cannot be lost, about a God who settled the account so that no one would ever have to stand before him on the basis of what they had or had not done. When the invitation came, my mother stood up and walked to the front of that church. She walked through a congregation of strangers with tears running down her face, and she gave her life to Jesus. I watched her do it, and I could not breathe for how beautiful it was. This was not a young girl with nothing to lose. This was a grown woman with a heritage and a community and a faith she had held her whole life. And she walked toward Jesus anyway. Then my father stood up. The room shifted when he walked forward. I cannot explain it any other way. Some of the people around us, people who had never seen us before, who had no context for who we were or what this moment meant, began to weep. My classmate was gripping my hand so hard it hurt. My father stood at the front of that church and gave his life to Jesus Christ. I went forward then. I could not stay in my seat. We stood at the front together, my mother, my father, and me, as a family. We were baptized together a few weeks later. All four of us, my father, my mother, me, and my younger brother, who had watched the whole journey from a child perspective and decided simply that whatever his family was doing, he was in. When my father came up out of the water, the expression on his face was something I have no words large enough to hold. It was the face of a man who had not lost anything. A man who had finally found what he had been looking for his whole life without knowing he was looking. To every Christian reading this, please pray today for Muslim background believers who are navigating the cost of following Jesus, the fractured family ties, the lost friendships, the grief on both sides. Pray for families like this one. Pray that God who runs toward returning sons will keep running until every lost person is found. If you want to come home to Jesus today, say this simply and mean it. Jesus, I believe you are Lord. I believe you died for me and rose again. Forgive me. I give you my life. I am yours. He is already running toward you. Please share this story. Like it. Leave a comment with your location so we can pray together. And subscribe, because more stories like this one are coming, and someone you love may need to read the next one.